Hey everyone, my name is Manuel. I am a final year PhD student from Open Lab at Newcastle University, and today I'm talking about my paper, Place-Based Policymaking and HCI, Opportunities and Challenges for Technology Design, where we share some insights from a series of workshops with citizens and city planners. Today I'm mainly focusing on the fieldwork and discussion of that, so I would encourage you to refer to the paper for a more in-depth look at the literature and methodology. So to get started with a little bit of background, HCI has shown a continued interest in technologies for democracy and participation in all fields, but I'm obviously focused on place and urban planning. So a brief look to the literature, and I focus on two key areas. The first is HCI in policymaking, and there has been a growing interest and calls for more involvement in policymaking in HCI. This has actually resulted in the creation of a forum in interactions, which led to a range of work around social networking, e-government, accessibility in the built environment, and much more. More recently, there's been work done to show the boundary between HCI and policymaking, showing how research is currently translated to affect policy. However, there's still an issue in that much of the recent civic tech work focuses on, for example, developing a new method to engage citizens, but then does quite little to show how citizens' voices carry through and affect that policy. In terms of HCI and democratic participation, there's an ever-growing body of literature that focuses on supporting interactions, increasing civic participation in institutional decision-making and the shaping of public services. In urban planning, there's been a focus for a number of years on e-gov and e-participation, but this tends to aim to digitise service delivery, reduce costs and decrease efficiency, but it often results in one-way tokenistic engagement. Now, there has been attempts to move beyond this, which is positive, but the planning field tends to still lag behind in terms of the adoption and the use of civic technology. In HCI, however, there has been a civic turn, which is aimed to support new interactions with place, improve engagement practices, more citizen-led decision-making, activism, grassroots movements, and the empowerment of citizens. It's amongst this background that my work sits, and I wanted to explore how HCI could better support citizen-led policymaking, and I used the case study of neighbourhood planning for this. So just to explain what that is briefly, it was created through the Localism Act 2011, an Act of Parliament in the UK. This gives direct power to citizens to create their own planning policy, which would then be adopted by the local authority and it would be used in decision making. So it has statutory weight and it gives real power. The process for producing a neighbourhood plan can be quite complex, and it's shown here on the slides. To begin with, though, what usually happens is citizens form a group which takes the plan forward and does all of the tasks associated with that. So engaging their community, gathering evidence and writing the policy. So to explore this space, I ran 4 workshops, 3 with citizens involved in neighbourhood planning and 1 with city planners. Citizen recruitment focused on neighbourhood planning groups that had either finished the process or had almost finished, and this was so we could have a good reflection on their journey of creating that policy. The workshop with planners came from a long-standing relationship with a volunteer organisation, and they all came from different backgrounds, so private and public sector, but importantly they had all either worked in neighbourhood planning or had an interest in it. The interactive workshop focused on creating a journey map and talking through the process of how they got from sort of beginning to end. And more information on the methodology can be found in the paper. So what did I find? Well, firstly, here are the messy journey maps, which show the earlier diagram to be hugely simplified, and it shows that it's not a realistic depiction of citizens' experiences. You can see that each one is different, and ultimately it's just very messy. So further to this, there were four main themes identified through the data as well, and the first of those is access and policy processes. So I found that in most cases, citizens had found out about neighbourhood planning by accident or through word of mouth, which points to a general lack of awareness amongst communities about these policy opportunities. It was also shown that citizens then moved online to try and find out more information, but that the information online was actually too much and not the right type of information. As a quick example, one website actually had 25 pages worth of documents listed, and each document could be up to 30 pages long. So it was too complex, there was too much of it, it was jargon filled, and also it didn't really address the how of policy making. It then meant that we have groups of citizens embarking on a long, complex process with very little information as to what it entails. So they didn't feel that the path was clear, how to move through the process, they didn't know how long it would take or how much work was involved. The second theme was citizen government relationships, and citizens worked with city planners throughout the process for advice and guidance. This research was done within a local authority that was overall supportive of neighbourhood planning, which politically isn't always the case. But despite this, there were still issues within that citizen government relationship. Citizens saw that their support from the planners was too complex and that planners assumed citizens' knowledge. They felt that they assumed they had this planner knowledge that they simply didn't have. In contrast, city planners felt they gave the right level of support and they were conscious of providing that support but allowing the plan to remain community-led. So finally, there were key issues highlighted with the conflicting nature of advice that citizens received both from city planners and amongst different departments of local government. So this conflicting advice caused issues for policy development, particularly when the plan progressed to the final stages. The third theme was engaging citizens, and it was clear that citizens groups felt that they valued the concept of engagement and they wanted to do this well. However, their practices didn't match their values. So there was a reliance on traditional methods, which do have a place, but they reported only reaching the same 50 people. They also identified a key issue that they were unable to engage young people in the production of their policy. There was a keen interest by citizens and planners in using technology to better engage citizens. But when you look at the current reality, citizens groups referred to their website as their only mode of online engagement, and actually this was just to share documents like minutes of meetings with the public. It was also true that all of the citizens groups only set their website up halfway through the process, so overall it's not a great approach. One example that I do want to note is that one group had used a map-based commercial tool that allows communities to pin comments to a map, and they'd done this to modernise their consultation. What they didn't do, however, is think about the affordances of the technology they had chosen or the configuration of the participation. It was mainly used for convenience, and it resulted actually in reaching no new people. The final theme is policy, evidence and translation, in that access to data and evidence and the writing of policy becomes a significant challenge for citizens. So there's firstly a lack of understanding of what constitutes evidence. Communities want to use opinions, community opinions, but city planners privilege the use of technical data. Citizens felt they didn't have access to existing technical data, even though the local authority hold a lot of that for their own policy and processes. And when they did have access to that data, they couldn't understand it and they couldn't use it. They also didn't have any understanding or awareness of how they would go about collecting their own data if there was evidence missing. Finally, the task of writing the plan and policy was significantly problematic, both in terms of translating the wishes of the community into a realistic policy, but also using the correct planning language to write those policies, something which the city planners felt was incredibly important. In most cases, what happened was it required then significant support to rewrite policy, which then undermines the community-led nature of the process. So just a key point from these findings, something that stood out was that these policy processes seem to have been replicated from professional processes, those used by professionals in planning. which means that it follows some of the same issues around poor engagement practices, for example, which have been looked at for years. But what I say is that why can't policy making processes be more appropriate for citizens? So I want to put it to the HCI community that a change in approach is needed. Through this paper, we call for a more proactive approach to our involvement in policy processes. So we've shown that civic policy processes can be flawed from the outset. So proactive co-design of those with government and citizens could then help to develop new approaches that are fit for use. They're accessible, they're navigable, and they're appropriate. It could also then draw upon our skills around participatory design, interaction design, and designing through technology, things that urban planners maybe don't have the experience of doing. There's also an opportunity for HCI to consider the redesign of tools to be embedded within policy processes. So this would be as opposed to tools that don't consider policy at all, or that reactively respond to issues that are already situated in a problematic process. So we say that the HCI community should consider these processes holistically and how tools affect it, rather than designing a myriad of tools that each seek to individually solve a small part of a process. Bearing this in mind, we then outline 4 ways tools could better support policy processes. In the paper, we build on existing work in all of these areas, but today we focus on our recommendations specifically. So the first is collecting and understanding data. We suggest the need for a working ontology of data in an accessible format for citizens that could provide examples of common data sets, how they could be used and in what circumstances, and also what data could be collected, why and how. Toolkits could support the collection of data through educational material, physical components, visualization tools, and we propose that these tools should be flexible and adaptable to allow citizens' experiences to sit alongside that technical data. The second suggestion is peer-to-peer support. So that would be tools that could support interactions with legislation, helping citizens understand what policies and laws mean in practice. But it would also be about citizens sharing their learning, best practice, and speaking with others facing similar challenges, which could also be relevant for policy experts, so they could share learning, understanding, and interpretations, which could help to improve the consistency and quality of the advice that they give out. All of these tools should provide a space for debate which can focus on specific policy questions, so that discussion is then grounded in real-world problems. The third area is citizen participation. And there's already a wealth of tools and work on participatory technology, but we want to suggest a broader approach for the design of those tools. So we propose co-designing engagement methods with citizens to support capacity building and encourage innovation, recognising maybe the need to use more familiar technology where citizens are not tech literate. Through this, we could also look to discuss the affordances of technology and how participation could be configured to think through the consequences of the design decisions that are made. Methodological toolkits could then support citizens to run engagement activities with and through technology without the support of external researchers or other experts. And finally, the development of open source technology should be made accessible through toolkits and simple, accessible documentation. This stems from an issue that there's a lot of open source civic technology out there, but the level of skill that's needed to use, implement, maintain and manage this is generally not held by citizens and government, but a change in approach would mean that we could have a more sustainable long-term impact. The final suggestion is crowdsourcing, to use the knowledge of the crowd to create a database of policy phrases to support policy writing. And that database should be ongoing, growing and continually updated to account for and respond to the changing climate politically. These policy phrases could be recorded to contain local context to avoid using generic policy phrases that don't apply locally. Although our research is focused on neighbourhood planning, it could have broader implications for other policy processes in planning and beyond. but ultimately we have shown how place-based policy-making processes are complex and difficult to access for citizens. We argue that HCI researchers should become actively involved in supporting, innovating and redesigning policy processes, and to design tools embedded within policy, enabling citizens' voices to carry through to decision-making in a real way.